In the rest of this unit, we're going to learn about egoism and its opposite, altruism, with a focus on evaluating whether or not different forms of egoism are true. So the first thing we need to do is to find out what are we talking about when we talk about egoism and altruism. So ego, that's a Latin word, originally means me. The ALTR at the beginning of altruism comes from the Latin word alter, not meaning change, but rather others. So let's look at some examples of egoism and altruism. So I might keep a promise to somebody else, or I might break that promise. And keeping that promise is going to, but in general, let's imagine in this case, would benefit the other person. Certainly it shows respect for them. But you can imagine it's probably, in some cases, it would not benefit me as much as if I didn't keep my promise. But not keeping my promise might harm the other person and certainly is disrespectful. So keeping my promise is better for the others and more respectful for others. Not keeping my promise might be better for me, even so. So not necessarily always, but we can imagine cases where that's so. So in this case, we'd say A is altruistic because it's better for others, whereas B is egoistic because it's better for me. So in general, we can say that an egoistic action is the action that most benefits me, and the altruistic action is the action that most benefits everybody, including me, but not limited to me, so where we take everybody into account. So they might be the same action. So examples of actions that benefit me, eating, sleeping, and exercising, those are all good for me, but they also help others because I'm more able to interact well with other people if I eat and sleep and exercise, to at least some degree. If I sleep 24 hours a day, maybe not, but don't do that. On the other hand, sometimes helping others can benefit me for a variety of reasons. I might feel better about myself, they might help me back, and so on. So these actions, sometimes the egoistic action and the altruistic action overlap, but they definitely don't have to, and frequently they don't. Following the law is another example where an action might be both, the same action might be both best for me and best for others. We can also talk about egoistic and altruistic motivations. So egoism is the motivation to do whatever most benefits me, and altruism is the motivation to do what most benefits everybody. And again, sometimes those motivations can lead to the same action, but in many cases they would lead to different actions. So we're going to be discussing two forms of egoism, descriptive egoism and ethical egoism. What is descriptive egoism? So it's just a claim that each person is an egoist, that each person always does, in fact, what they believe will most benefit themselves. This is about what people actually do. It's not about what they should do. Rachel calls this psychological egoism in the Reading in the Con textbook. So we're doing ethics, so why do we care about descriptive egoism? Because descriptive egoism is not about what people should do, but that's what ethics is about. Descriptive egoism is about what people do, and that's not what ethics is about, is it? Well, so descriptive egoism definitely isn't itself an ethical claim, but it's also likely that if descriptive egoism were true, we would not have any altruistic ethical duties. Ethics is a guide. It applies within the realm of what you could do, and it tells you of the actions, among other things. Ethics is a guide, and it tells you of the things that you could do, which of those ought you to do. But that means that if you ought to do something, then you can do something. And that means if you can't benefit others at your own expense, then you shouldn't do so, right? If it's not possible for you to do the action, then ethics doesn't have anything to say about it. Ethics only talks about the actions that you are capable of doing. But if descriptive egoism is true, then you're only incidentally capable of acting altruistically. When you act altruistically, is because that's also the egoistic action, and you're always going to do the egoistic action. So if descriptive egoism were true, then any sort of altruistic ethical duties would just be irrelevant, or there wouldn't be any, because the claim you should do this would be irrelevant to our actual ability to make choices. And so if descriptive egoism is true, then presumably you wouldn't have any altruistic ethical duties. But that seems like altruistic ethical duties are a core component of ethics. Ethics is in large part about how we relate to other people, and it seems how we are sometimes required to benefit them and not harm them. Ethical egoism, on the other hand, is a straightforwardly ethical claim in itself. It says each person should be an egoist, which is to say that each person should always do what will most benefit themselves. So should I be altruistic even when doing so doesn't most benefit me? Ethical egoism says no, you shouldn't. So that, again, would seem to undermine our sort of basic ethical views. We may have disagreements and unclarity about our ethical views, but one of the basic claims is we need to take into account to at least some degree other people's interests. We ought to. Those other people's interests are of value. So we'll be discussing descriptive egoism in this module, and then we won't quite finish our discussion of it in this module because there's an issue that's going to sort of that's going to lead us over into ethical egoism, and I'll be discussing that issue in the next module. So we'll begin the discussion and do most of the discussion of descriptive egoism in this module. Next module we'll finish the discussion of descriptive egoism and talk more about ethical egoism. So in the next video I'm going to be looking at an argument for descriptive egoism.